Welcome to Anthem Memory Care's monthly webinar. Thank you for joining us today. Anthem Memory Care is proud to operate 20 communities across 9 states, and we're thrilled to have representation from all of them on this call. As a leader in memory care, our mission extends beyond our communities. We strive to be a trusted resource for families and caregivers everywhere. That's why for the past year and a half, we've been hosting these free monthly educational webinars, providing valuable insights and support to those navigating the journey of memory care. Today's presentation is being recorded and can be accessed along with all past webinars on Anthem's website under Family Resources. You can also access them on your Anthem YouTube channel. Let me ask you some questions. Are you hoping to better understand how to communicate with someone who has dementia? Do you want to better reduce your stress caring for someone with dementia? If you answered yes to either of those questions, you're in the right place. Our presenter this evening is the author of Cruising Through Caregiving, Reducing the Stress of Caring for Your Loved One, as well as Reimagining Customer Service in Healthcare. She's a former gerontology instructor at Johns Hopkins University's Certificate on Aging program. One of less than 800 certified speaking professionals worldwide, she has been featured in national media, including ABC, CBS, The Washington Post, and the Chicago Tribune. When she's not speaking and writing about caregiving and healthcare, she can be found wandering around consignment shops looking for a great deal. Please join me in welcoming, all the way from Kent Island, Maryland, Jennifer FitzPatrick, MSW, CSP.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be with you here tonight to talk about a really important topic, quality of life, when our loved one has a memory problem. Quality of life is a term that gets thrown around an awful lot, especially as we go through the aging process. But it's important to remember that everybody has a different idea about what quality of life is. So I'm going to share with you a picture of my grandmother. And this is one of my favorite pictures of my grandma. She is with her best friend, my Aunt Marion, who was her first cousin. And I love this picture. Both of them, quality of life to them, particularly my grandmother, was really very simple. A lot of it had to do with family. A lot of it had to do with the beach, and a lot of it had to do with faith. So growing up in Philadelphia in a Catholic family, my grandmother loved to go to mass. She loved to do the rosary. She loved to go to the Jersey Shore, Wildwood, New Jersey, and just really simple things like going out to lunch, going out to dinner. And you see we're at a restaurant here, and this is a big smile on her face. Everybody, though, has a different idea of what quality of life means to them, whether it's you or your loved one who has dementia. And so when somebody has a cognitive impairment, a lot of times our idea of what quality of life for that person is, it shifts, it adjusts, it means something a little bit different. Now, a lot of times when somebody's got a loved one who has a Alzheimer's disease or Lewy body or any kind of dementia, family and friends focus so much on, are they physically healthy? Are they safe? Are they clean? But quality of life can be a whole lot more than that. And in order for our persons with dementia that we're helping to take care of to truly thrive as much as possible, we want to consider all the different pieces of the pie. And so I want to invite you to consider your life as well as your loved one's life as pieces of a pie put together. And so you'll see one part of the pie is for work and volunteer. One part is physical health, psychological, social, spiritual, financial, intimate relationship. Now, for many of you on this program today, every single part of this pie might be important to you, that you want to fill up each part. You want to have satisfaction with your physical health, with a marriage or a partner, with your spiritual life. Work or volunteering might be really important to you. Most of the time, most people will say the physical health, that's where it's at, or the financial health. I think overall, we can statistically say most people will say that's really crucial for them. But many other people do believe that psychological or spiritual or social is absolutely essential. I want you to consider, if you are one of those folks that thinks, well, physical health and finance, that's really the most important thing to me. I want you to think about the fact that all of these components really have to do with your overall satisfaction in life. And so it's while we as family caregivers are looking at how do we make sure somebody's physically healthy as possible, that they're safe, that we're able to pay for the items that they need, your loved one and you really do need probably at least a few other pieces of the pie in order to have what most people would consider a good quality of life. So, what I want to invite everybody to do right now is I'd love you to grab a piece of paper and a pen, or if you would do open a Word doc on your computer or open up a tab on your phone. And I just want you to think about, where would you score your quality of life for today? And so 0 would be you have no quality of life, that you feel like just nothing is right. None of the pieces of the pie are filled up for you. And then 100 would be it can't get any better, that your quality of life could not be better. It could not be happier. You couldn't be more fulfilled. So this is for you, the family caregiver. What number would you assign to your quality of life today? Now, I know this is just a snapshot of this evening, but I want you to just give it a number. So give you a moment to think about what your number is. And I want you to write it down, because we're going to come back to that in a little while. And remember, this is for you. Whoever, if you're on this program listening, what's your number? And then, of course, the next question, the next logical question is, what would you put for your loved one's quality of life? Would you put them closer to no quality of life, a 0? Or would you say they're more closer to 100, somewhere in the middle? Now, if you're trying to gauge this for your mom or your husband or whoever it is that you're taking care of, that can be really tough. That can be challenging. Now, you just want to take your best guess. And again, write down, what number would you assign to that person's quality of life? Take your best guess. If your loved one is still verbal and they're in the early stages of their condition, it might be something that you could talk to them about. We last month, I was invited by Anthem to speak about different stages and what's normal in different stages. And a lot of times in the early stages, you can talk to your loved one. You can ask them a question like, "Where would you put your quality of life today?" They'll be able to answer it. Maybe not every day they couldn't have a conversation like that, but sometimes they can. Whereas somebody in the mid stages, probably not going to be able to respond to that question the way we want them to. And in the later stages, definitely not. So I wouldn't necessarily ask this question of your loved one unless you find them to be in the earlier stages, where you can ask them a question about anything. You can talk to them about current events. You can talk to them about what they feel like having for dinner, and they retain the information a lot of the time. So, other than that, if your loved one's in the really early stages, you're welcome after this program. Go ahead and ask them, where would they put their quality of life? And you can share work, physical, social, spiritual. But if not, if they're in mid stage, late, or if they're in that early stage where they really won't be able to respond, you go ahead, please, if you would assign them a number. Okay. So you got your numbers. We're going to come back to those in a little bit. So while a lot of people say physical health is the most important, financial well being, those are the really crucial pieces for getting older well, there is a lot of data, a lot of data that supports that if we are lonely or isolated, that not only is our physical health go down, but everything else suffers as well. Our psychological health, our relationships. So let's start out by really defining, what do these terms mean, because a lot of people really use them interchangeably. Loneliness is a term that's really subjective. So you and I can choose for ourselves, would we categorize ourselves as lonely or not lonely? Nobody else necessarily can do that for you. That said, because you're taking care of somebody with cognitive issues, I want you to consider if your loved one is beyond the early stages of their dementia, can you gauge, do you think that they would describe themselves as lonely if they had the language? I know it's a tough one because it's really something that's very subjective and individualized. So loneliness is really something, it's really tough for another person to put a label on another, but I'm going to ask you to do that if you're not able to have that conversation with your loved one. Having a dementia diagnosis can be so lonely because we oftentimes see people not want to talk about it with you. They pull away. Maybe you don't feel connected with people that you used to before. You might feel like you're going through something completely alone that nobody else is going through, which we know is absolutely incorrect. So it's how we feel. Loneliness is, how does the person feel? You or your loved one, how do we feel? And so, again, if you are taking care of somebody, consider for yourself, would you describe yourself as feeling lonely? And also feel free to write that down on your piece of paper or your Word doc. But also, please ask your loved one if he or she is in the early stages and you can have an honest conversation about this. Go ahead and talk to them about that. But if they're not, take your best guess. Would you say that that person is feeling lonely? And so just document whatever you're thinking. Because we're going to put this all together for a plan. A little bit further, a lack of intimacy, a lack of connecting. So intimacy, I know a lot of people tend to think of intimacy as something between spouses or romantic partners, and of course, that's not all that we mean by that. When we're lacking being able to be our true selves, and I think in the last few years with COVID policies and COVID and obviously we're not going to talk about politics, but a lot of stuff going on politically, people having different opinions on things, people having different thoughts and feelings about a lot of different topics. Feeling that connection to other people, that somebody understands how I feel, what I'm going through. For some people, a lot of people have described that as being more lacking uh, for somebody whose brain is working properly. Now, while Alzheimer's and Lewy body and frontotemporal dementia and Parkinson's dementia, all of that is terrible. One of the things that might not contribute to loneliness for somebody with dementia is they might not have that awareness of all of the things that might be going on in the world that can be causing discord, people feeling less connected to each other. Ironically, we have all this social media, which I utilize all the time for work. But one of the things people talk about so often is feeling like other people's lives are perfect. And if you're in the situation where you're caregiving, you might not be posting on social media about what's going on with your loved one or how tough some of the challenges are that you're facing. Maybe you're watching other people post the best parts of their life, a vacation or great things going on with their kids or promotion at work. And that, for some people, if you are active on social media, that can really feel and contribute to more of a feeling of loneliness. And that's probably more for you than it would be for your loved one. So, again, best thought of, am I feeling lonely? Is my loved one feeling lonely? Social isolation, on the other hand, is much more objective. And social isolation is really about social contacts. And so we can actually measure how socially isolated somebody is. And so I'm curious what people think of as a social contact. Uh, Obviously, in-person social contacts are great. Going out to lunch with a friend, uh, taking a boat ride with a family member, uh, going to a basketball game to watch your daughter play. Those are actually in-person social interactions that we can count, and those are terrific. Having somebody over to your house for coffee, but you can also count phone calls, telephone calls. Participating in a program like this would be counting as a social contact if you participate, if you ask a question, if you make a comment when we open it up for comments and questions. If you find yourself on social media, engaging with others, that can be considered a contact as well. Having a Skype call or a FaceTime call with somebody, that can be considered one of the social contacts. So, what I want to ask everybody to be doing right now is to be objective about your social contacts. So today is a Wednesday for those of us who are joining live, and for those of you who are on the recorded version. Please feel free to start from whatever day you're watching this. But I want you to think about the last week of your life. So a week, Wednesday of or Thursday of last week to Wednesday of this week, how many contacts did you have socially? All of the things that I just talked about. And so I can go ahead and give you some of mine. I've done a couple of in-person presentations too. This is one virtual presentation. I've had lunch with a friend. I've talked on the phone to several of my family members. So that's where I'm going with this. These kinds of contacts where you're able to count the number. And so ideally, we're getting into the double digits in the course of a week. We're getting 10, 12, 15, 20, and at least some in-person social contacts. Now, again, going back to COVID and COVID policies, you may recall that that was limited for a lot of people in 2020, and that we had to find new ways to not be completely isolated. And you might remember during that time, I don't know how many people did this, but I know that I was on a lot of Zoom coffees with friends and family, Zoom happy hours. I did tons and tons of virtual presentations. I watched tons and tons of virtual presentations. But that was the way we were counting our social contacts. Other ways during that time, uh, I remember taking walks around the neighborhood and waving to neighbors and saying hello and stopping. And we had the whole 6 feet thing and, talk, but you got a social contact. You got that counted for a social contact. Um, so much like what happened in 2020, where many of us we didn't have as many in person, this tends to happen to people sometimes if they have dementia, if they're living in a private home, if they're not in a senior living community like Anthem, because there's less people engaging with them in person. Not to say that whoever they live with isn't doing a good job, but it's just less engagement with many other people. So ideally, we want to see at least 5 in-person engagements, different people in a week's time. We want to see well into the double digits and maybe even the triple digits in terms of virtual or phone calls or those sorts of things. So, social isolation is low contact with others, just low contact with others. And so I want you to be trying to add up for both you and your loved one, because this is something we can count. How many in the last week or so, how many social interactions, phone calls, virtual programming like this, social media interactions, emails, anything that you can say it counts as a contact with another person or a group of people. And so try to take a moment. If you can do it during this program, that's great. I think it's always nice to be able to do it while you're on, so you can be thinking about it and you can talk about it when we get to the question part. But also, do it for your loved one. Where is your loved one in terms of numbers of social contact outside of you or the person that they live with? So there's tons and tons and tons of data. This is just one piece. Former Surgeon General likened years ago. it was sitting is the new smoking. Well, loneliness and weak social connection are also, they talk about it being about 15 cigarettes a day. And we all know that we're not supposed to be smoking. And I think that message has been really clear. But being isolated, being lonely, weak social connections are even more damaging than obesity or cigarettes. That's the belief from all the data that is out there. And there is plenty of data about this. And so if you are one of those people out there that says, physical health and financial, that's really the things that are most important, I want to encourage you to think about the other pieces: the work, the volunteer, the psychological health, the socialization, the spiritual, the financial, the intimate relationship. So, what are we at risk for if we are isolated and lonely? Like I said, there's so much data that demonstrates that it's not good for us to have low social contacts. It's not good for us to label and identify ourselves as feeling and being lonely. So, what are the things that can happen when this occurs? When we have, so again, I want you to be looking at your numbers, and I want you to be looking about if you self-describe as lonely, or you believe that your loved one would self-describe as lonely. If you've got both of them, there's even more risk for what we're about to talk about. So, I'm not telling you all this to scare you or get you upset, but I want you to know what's at stake so you can think about, all right, well, if this is happening, how do I change it? How do I fix it? How do I get better quality of life for myself and my loved one and anybody that's on our caregiving crew? So, for one, if we are lonely and isolated, we are at increased risk for abuse, for physical abuse, for any type of abuse, domestic violence, any kind of abuse, abuse by a stranger. We are at risk for neglect, for getting neglected by somebody else, but also self-neglect. We are also at tremendous increased risk for financial exploitation. So think about all of the people out there that there's a cottage industry on financial exploitation. I'm sure every single day you get something on your phone, in your email. They got really far out, more sophisticated than the Nigerian prince from when email first came out. I remember that one going around, but you still get an occasional one like that. I'm sure everybody has had that experience. But I think for financial exploitation's just got a lot trickier. It's almost like these folks that are trying to exploit financially, it's like a full-time job. And if they were salespeople for something ethical, they'd have great careers potentially, because they do wind up tricking a lot of people. So when somebody calls your house or calls your cell phone, and again, a good plan is for us to just not answer when somebody calls and we don't recognize the number, but sometimes there's reasons why we need to answer. But financial exploitation is when somebody calls. I have a friend whose dad, who had dementia, his dad answered the phone and they said that they had his grandson. They kidnapped his grandson and that he had to go down to Western Union and take out money and send the money to the kidnappers so they would release his grandson. Now, his grandson was at college at Temple University, and he could not be convinced. He called his son. They said, Dad, he's fine. He's safe. We just talked to him. He's not been kidnapped. This is a scam. And his dad just really could not figure out that was the truth. When somebody has dementia, and he was in the earlier stages, didn't have full-time help around him, wasn't in senior living yet, and he was very much at risk. But one of the good things that came out of it is he did not fall victim because he had the social contact. He came very close to sending the money via Western Union. He came very close to doing that. but he didn't do it. He had somebody to check in. Think about anything that happens to us. If we don't have other people that we can check in with and say, does this sound right? Does this make sense? Years ago, my grandmother, who you met earlier, she was at her local bank where she banked forever. And the person at the bank, she was complaining to them how she lost a lot of money in the stock market crash. And they put her in a product on the spot that she was not going to be able to get her money out for 7 years. Now, thankfully, she told my dad and my husband, who are in the financial industry. And again, the social contacts saved her. She had a 30-day clause. She could get out of this product. I don't know if this person at the bank was intending to exploit her. It wasn't an illegal product, but it was definitely not a good fit based on my grandmother's financial situation. But even perhaps more importantly, the abuse and the neglect, physically. If somebody is only with one family caregiver all the time, or one daughter, one son, I know most daughters and sons and nieces and nephews and grandkids, they're trying really hard to take care of their loved one and do the best job possible. But when you have checks and balances in the family and friend network, that make sure that there's a lot of people checking in, we reduce the risk of neglect and physical abuse as well. Physical consequences: when we identify as lonely and isolated, we have increased stroke risk, sleep problems. We are more susceptible to accidents. And these can be any kind of accidents: home accidents, falling in the bathroom. These can be accidents, car accidents, slipping in the driveway when it snows, any kind of accident. Increased risk of heart attack, and then dying by suicide becomes more of a potential. So I know that a lot of people here are thinking, well, my loved one is they're probably not in the headspace. They're in the mid stages of Alzheimer's. They're not going to be at risk for suicidal ideation as much. And that may be because they're maybe not aware of some of these issues, but that can be a problem potentially for you if your social contacts are low. Sleep problems. I can't say how many caregivers historically have tons of sleep problems because of the stress they're under and managing so many different things. But the isolation and loneliness contributes and actually makes it worse. So psychologically, cognitively, we are more at risk for depression. Now, again, I'm a former psychotherapist. If you already had a history of depression, or you have depression in your family, this is going to make it more pronounced. This is going to make it so you aren't, you're going to be less able to, you're going to be more likely to succumb to depressive symptoms. Fatigue, utilizing substances like drugs, alcohol, legal drugs, and illegal drugs. And some studies that are very interesting, and I think we don't need to worry about this for your loved one because unfortunately they already have a dementia diagnosis. But if we have low social contact and we feel lonely, we are more at risk for our own dementia diagnosis. It increases our risk. And I know that that's a big fear for so many of us who deal with a loved one who has dementia. We are watching the struggles that they go through. We're examining what we are going through, it being their family caregiver, and we don't want to put that on our kids or other family members in our life. So increasing the risk of dementia can be a really tricky one too, that we want to be avoiding. And some studies even, I find this very interesting, that somebody that's lonely and isolated is actually going to experience perhaps more hallucinations when they have a dementia diagnosis. And for those of you who are handling your loved one, suffering with hallucinations, it's really not fun. It's tough. It's hard for you to deal with. It's hard for them to deal with. And so loneliness and isolation can make it worse, but being socially engaged and feeling connected can actually make it better. So we talked about, and these are just some of what the data suggests and demonstrates that we are at risk for when we are dealing with isolation and loneliness. So here's what we want to avoid. You know what I mean. Your loved one's on the couch all day, every day. They're napping, they're watching TV. They're napping, they're watching TV, or they're in that chair. That's what we want to avoid. And if you, and I'm curious if anybody wants to share when we get to the Q&A part, is your loved one in that situation? Because all of us who work in this field, we've seen it a million times. Because the person, if they're living at home and it's one caregiver or two caregivers that are helping out, there's not a lot of time that you're able, or energy maybe, to do a lot of things that are going to engage that person. And so the default is the couch, the chair, the Law and Order marathons, or maybe worse, the news, because the news is stressful. And there is data to suggest that when somebody's watching TV, if they have a cognitive impairment, that they are sometimes, for some people, that they believe what's going on the television is happening for real. So if you're watching the news, which a lot of older adults, that's their default, they're seeing about a fire, they're seeing about something negative that happened, because a lot of the news is quite negative. We want to avoid that as much as we possibly can. I had a family that I worked with years ago when I was a psychotherapist, who her every day her dad would leave his master bedroom when he and his wife would be in the master bedroom getting ready for the day. And every day when he was going to get changed into his day clothes, he took all of his clothes into the hallway bathroom. And the reason that they ultimately figured out, because he was still verbal, is because he didn't want those people to watch him get changed. His wife would have like the Today Show on, or Good Morning America, or one of those, and he believed that they were watching him. And so the TV can be really tricky. For some people, it's not a problem, but for others, it is. We also see a lot of people, when they sit on that couch or in that chair, they are pretending to read the newspaper or read a book or something like that. And if their comprehension is no longer what it once was, if they're not able to enjoy that, not stimulating, it's lonely, and there's low social contact involved with this. So many of you probably have heard the song A Little Less Talk, A Lot More Action, made popular by Toby Keith in the 90s, but actually was originally written, I believe, I want to say the 50s, by a couple of other artists. But the antidote for social contacts when you have somebody who has dementia is focusing less on talking and conversation, and focusing a lot more on taking action. So, and I know that this can be really hard, because if your loved one, say it's like your spouse and they're your best friend, and they gave great advice, or you always enjoyed talking about current events or talking about your kids and your grandkids, and now he or she is no longer able to really engage like that anymore. It's so disappointing. It's so tough, but pushing conversation is gonna probably not give you the results that you desire. Action, connecting in other ways, is going to be probably better for them. One of the things that I see a lot of people do, if they have a loved one in senior living, like an Anthem, is they'll go in for a visit and they'll say, "Well, how was your day?" Or, "What did you eat today?" And I I always try to encourage folks to just, we don't want to ask those kinds of questions. And much like your loved one is an adult, they are a grown up. We all know this. But much like when you talk to a small child and say, "Well, what did you learn in school today?" That is not a question that they want to answer. They'd rather engage in an activity with you, and they're going to open up more usually during that. And it's very different. Of course, a child is growing and going to progress, and an older person with dementia is regressing. But we want to focus, when we're looking at isolation and loneliness, especially if it's past the early stages of the disease, we want to focus on action. So, what kind of action can we take so we can reduce isolation and loneliness? So we can boost social contacts. I have a friend whose mom went to senior living in January, and she's not doing great. She wasn't doing great. She wasn't at home. She was not very verbal anymore. She wasn't able to do many of her activities of daily living. And I checked in with my friend. I've been checking in with him every couple of weeks. And he said she's known as the dancing queen of her senior living community because whenever music comes on, she dances. And this is a woman that's not verbal. So what are they doing? They're not going in there and saying, Nancy, how was your day? What did you have for breakfast today? Did you meet any friends? They're not doing that. They're putting music on when they see her, and they're getting social contacts. Now, she's already getting social contacts and connectedness because she is with people all day, every day. She's in contact with other residents, family members and friends that visit. She's in contact with the staff there. But they are getting tips from the senior living community. Here's what you do when you come in, put on a song that she likes. And so if your loved one is at a community, talk to the staff. Tell me, instead of starting a conversation like, how's your day going? Or do you like it here? Or have you met any new people? What can you actually do? And I guarantee you that they're going to be able to give you good answers. They're going to be able to tell you, hey, this is what we've noticed, especially if your loved one has been there for a little bit of time. They're going to say, these are the things that we've noticed. Because you have to remember that the staff at the community are looking at your loved one through a totally different lens. You're remembering who your loved one once was, maybe very talkative, maybe inhibited, maybe wouldn't dance. And they're seeing your loved one where he or she is today. So engage. That's action that you can take. Ask what's working. You also might even consider coming around and observing your loved one when they don't know that you're there. What do they seem to be lit up by? Is it old movies? Is it a puzzle? Is what kinds of things? What kind of activities? Is it exercise class? Taking a walk? What kinds of things when you're there, when you're observing, when you're not with them? Because what happens a lot of times if somebody's loved one is already in senior living, that family member comes and all of a sudden the person is saying, I want to go home. I don't like it here. And you might get that no matter what from your loved one. However, the truth might be that when you're not there, they are engaging, and you can take some of that, what's working well, and apply it to your own visits. So, what else? So, let's talk about outdoor action that you can take. Something like going and checking out the sunrise or the sunset. Now, I actually should preface this by saying not all of these ideas are going to be perfect for your loved one, but some of them will be. So please keep an open mind, especially if you have identified loneliness and isolation as a problem. Some of them will work. For example, somebody who is in the very late stages maybe can't get out of bed, maybe really they're not going to be able to go outdoors. Then that's a little bit different. But I want you to be looking at what can you use and leave the rest behind. Somebody that can't have a conversation about current events or talk to you about the movies that you just saw or what is going on with the grandkids, they can garden. And it's really grounding and good for that person to be using their hands, to be getting outside, to be able to plant something or dig up weeds. These are activities that somebody often in early, mid stages and can really do and engage, and they're getting out. They might see a neighbor, they might do it alongside you or somebody else in your family. Boating or swimming. Again, we want this to be supervised because the way that the brain works, we don't, if they forget how to swim or something like that, because we know people forget how to use a fork, they can forget how to walk. But something on the water, going out on a canoe or a kayak with a loved one with proper safety measures in place in an area that is protected. So as we get into warmer weather, there things on the water that can be done? This might be somebody that my friend's mom can't, she's not verbal, but she can dance. Could she swim with supervision? I don't know. But it's a good thing to ask yourself. Just because the brain isn't working properly and a lot of the body is changing doesn't mean you can't try things. Walking, hiking, anything to get outside. And this really does a lot of good if you have a loved one who is somebody that is wandering, getting them that exercise, getting them out in the fresh air, getting them a change of scenery. And when I say hiking, I don't mean anything overly taxing. Something light, something that, it's going to be in a safe area, something supervised. But action like that, going on a hike, going on a walk, going swimming, rather than having a conversation. Playing with pets or kids, the least judgmental among us. Uh, Kimberly Williams Paisley wrote a book called Where the Light Gets In. It's a really, really good book. And if someone could put that in the chat, that would be great. I think I might have mentioned that last time. But she talks about how when her mom had dementia, that her sons would sit down on the floor and play with her mom, and they didn't have memory of her mother the way she was before she had dementia. And so there's no judgment. They're having fun, she's having fun, and it's beautiful. It's really a beautiful thing. And this is how you can engage children and pets, of course, as long as there's no allergies or anything like that. And of course, this is something that can be done indoors. But don't be afraid to engage little kids, especially. They are typically joy to the person with dementia. Obviously, mom shouldn't be babysitting. We don't want her babysitting the children, but when you're in the next room, when you're in the same room, having something that they can do together, play together. Indoor activities, listening to music, dancing, singing. Somebody who can't speak, it's a miracle. It is a miracle that the person can sing. Somebody that really seems to have trouble walking might be dancing in their chair. Music penetrates the long-term memory. If you've ever seen the documentary Alive Inside, I recommend that if anybody can put that in the chat section. That is a really great film about an experiment that was done, I believe, in nursing homes and senior living communities, about giving people music that they personally like, giving them headphones loaded up with music that they like, and watching the reactions that they had. I think you can watch it for free now. I don't remember where it is today, but it's out there. And even if your loved one wasn't somebody that loved music, maybe some people like music more than others, but try it. It's really worth it. It almost seems like magic. Massage, giving a manicure or a pedicure, giving a back massage, giving a hand massage, giving a scalp massage. Those types of things can be very, very soothing to somebody. And again, better than having the conversation. What did you do today? How do you like it here? So I was saying be careful about television, and I know that everybody is different. Every person with dementia is going to have a different experience. And the example that I gave about the gentleman worried that people on the Today Show or Good Morning America were going to watch him, that does happen. It does, or that they believe, okay, if there's a fire, or, I remember around 9/11, when in senior living communities and private homes, everyone had the news on all the time, and a lot of people with dementia were getting very agitated, very, very disturbed. It was upsetting to everybody, because you're seeing the towers come down again, you're seeing the plane crashes, but so that's a little bit different. But movies that are in the long-term memory of your loved one, what were favorite movies? What were movies that were popular when they were teenagers, in their 20s, in their 30s? What do you know that are movies that they liked? They can have it possible to have a lousy reaction, and for them to think that the people are in the room with them, or for them to think that the things that are happening on the screen are real. That can happen, but it's worth trying, putting it on for 15 minutes or 30 minutes, watching part of a movie. A lot of the activities that we want to do to reduce isolation and loneliness, you might do it for a short period of time. A massage doesn't have to be all day, or it can be 5 minutes, it could be 3 minutes. Um, Doing some kind of chores, cooking, cleaning, sweeping, folding. Uh, and again, all of the things that we're talking about here, and I'm going to back up to the outdoor activities. These are items that you can assign to do with other people. So for example, maybe you're the primary caregiver, your loved one lives at home with you, and you've got a niece that really wants to help out. Well, send your niece out with your wife to garden for an hour. That's a way that he or she can contribute. Your grandkids come over, that is a way that they can contribute. If your friend has a boat and you can try to go out on the boat. Now, keep in mind, the big thing you want to realize is if you're doing anything that you don't know for sure usually works well and is a good social engagement, keep it easy and slow. So I'm going to give you the example with kids and persons with dementia again. And again, in my book, Cruising Through Caregiving, I talk about that sometimes persons with dementia do behave childlike. They are still adults. That the whole chapter is about your older loved one is still a grown up. But when my husband and I have been boating for 15, more than that, but we have lots of nieces and nephews and lots of friends with kids that bring their children down. And what we'll do is when the child first gets on the boat, of course, we make them put on the life jacket and all that. And the child almost always cries. If they're under 3, they usually start to cry. Under two or 3, depending on the child. They cry, they don't like it, they don't want to do it. And we always say to the parent, we're going to just go really close. We're just going to ride around really close. And if this continues more than 10, 15 minutes, we'll come back. And the parents are always like, okay. And I will tell you, we've never brought a child back less than an hour because they are soothed. A lot of times they fall asleep, they take a nap, they become enamored with the wildlife, they like the waves. But the same idea is if this is a new activity you're doing with your loved ones, it boosts social engagement. Make sure you can course correct, you can turn around. You don't necessarily want to be out in the high seas on a boat, or at a swim club at a pool where you have to be there for 10 hours a day or something like that. You don't. Those are the kinds of things you just want to take it slow and be willing to course correct if it's not going well. So doing chores. This is just, it feels normal. And again, this is something that you could have a neighbor come over and they fold laundry together, or they're sweeping the porch together. These are ways you can integrate social contacts and reduce loneliness by having other people participate and you get a break. We're not saying you have to leave. If you are the primary caregiver, you live at home with this person, go into the other room for 15 minutes. Let somebody else take over for a little while. Puzzles, games, does it matter if the rules are followed? Again, maybe for 15, 20 minutes. This is something that other people in your friend family network can do. The MET exercise, if you go to cruisingthroughcaregiving.com, all the exercises from the book are completely free. But that is an exercise to help you figure out friends, family, people from your faith community that can fill in and do these sorts of things with your loved one. It doesn't always have to be you. Other indoor activities, watching or listening to sports events or talk radio. Radio, especially for our older adults, people in their 80s, 90s, and older in particular, radio is in their long-term memory even more so than television. And so maybe listening, yes, music, but a sporting event or talk radio can be very soothing, and that can be something you do together. Looking at old photographs. Again, this is a great activity for somebody that's not you, somebody that loves your loved one, that wants to participate, and then that can be an additional social engagement. stretching, tai chi, yoga. People that can't have long conversations, this anthem will tell you they are doing exercise. They are able, there's stuff that they are still able to do. And if you're at home, this is something you can try, put on YouTube. Get some, there's great stuff on Netflix and Prime and all the channels. But there's free stuff on YouTube too. Pull up an exercise class, a chair yoga, something like that. Any kind of art, drawing, painting, coloring. I know it's a little controversial with coloring and coloring books. I know the antidote to that has been the adult coloring books with the coloring pencils, but whatever works. This is something, again, I think works really, really well, really, really well with small children doing it together, because that person in their long-term memory, they're thinking, I'm spending time with this child where it's not an infantilizing activity. And then spiritual practice. Uh, if my grandmother were still alive and had dementia, I know that we'd be doing the rosary with her every day, meditating, um, going, putting services on of whatever denomination your loved one is, if they're not able to get out of the house. Going to the house of worship that your loved one likes is great. But again, just be willing to course correct. If it's not going well, if it's too many people, if they become agitated, you got to be willing to cut your losses and get out. Uh, and that's the big thing. Trying any of this, if it involves, because we can trigger somebody. Somebody can find it to be not comfortable, or too many people, or they're pulling a muscle while they're stretching. So just always be looking out for what's on their face, what facial expressions do they have, uh, are they smiling, do they look miserable. You can gauge how long that you should be doing that activity, or how long somebody should be helping out with that activity. Actions from a vehicle. I think cars can be terrific for social engagement, especially if this is something that someone else who loves your loved one is going to do. Takes your loved one for a ride. And again, listening to sports on the radio. And this is not quite the time of year for it. We're getting into spring for those of you who are on live, but maybe you'll be listening to this when it's the holiday season. But going out just to look at holiday decorations, foliage, checking out urban sites, city sites, buildings, farm life, just getting out for a ride. And again, this is something, a way that somebody else in your friend, family, faith community, neighbor network can participate, that your loved one gets additional social contacts. You don't necessarily have to do it. And again, if it's not going well, if they're not enjoying looking at the foliage, or they're not enjoying looking at the farm life, they're not enjoying listening to the sports on the radio, course correct, come back, try again. And the thing about dementia, as awful and terrible and hard as it is you always get a second chance to, if it doesn't go well, you try something new. Your loved one, because of what's gone on with their memory, they're not going to hold it against you for too long. So when do you need to make a change? So for one, if your quality of life score is low, and I would say low being under 65, you, the family caregiver, if your score is under 65, you need to make a change. Whether it's looking at a community like Anthem, whether it's bringing some extra help into the home, whether it's engaging with other friends and family and faith community, like I said, the MET exercise at cruisingthroughcaregiving.com that you can download for free. Because when you have some time to yourself, your quality of life score is going to increase. When you believe your loved one's quality of life score is low, and whether that be because of loneliness, because of isolation. And a big red flag for when you really need to make a change is you just don't have the energy for these nonverbal activities. You got to look at senior living, or you got to look at getting friends, family, paid help into the home. Because what we want to avoid is your loved one on that couch all day with the Law and Order marathon or the news. That's great to spend a day like that once in a while when you have a cold. We don't want that day in and day out for anybody. We want them engaged. Their physical health, their social health, their psychological health will be better if there's other things going on in their life. And remember, even if your loved one was a very vulnerable person during the course of their life, most likely that's diminishing. And so you're not going to be able to connect through conversation the way that you once were. So if any of these, and if all of these, if you can check the box for all of these, it's definitely time to look at, what am I going to do differently? How am I going to do something differently? So what we're going to do now is open it up for questions, comments, anything that anybody would like to ask. We are here. We're glad to, for myself, I'm glad to answer any questions about the presentation. And I know that Anthem is here if you have any questions specifically for them.
So you can either go ahead and type your question into the chat, or if you raise your hand, I can take you off of mute. Give folks a couple of minutes just to type things in.
Sure.
And I did add all the resources that Jen mentioned into the chat.
Thank you.
Including her website. Jen, it looks like you did a very thorough job today.
Well, if there's anything, if you have a particular situation you're dealing with today where you want to give a specific example, I'm really happy to workshop it with you. Something specific going on with your loved one and you want to ask something, I will do the best that I can to talk it through with you.
No, I don't think there's any questions coming through. You did a great job. We appreciate it. I love all the programs or the ideas of great interactions and connections that you provided. I thought that was really helpful. So really appreciate that.
Thank you. I will leave you just with one last thing. I'm going to go back to the pie for just a moment. And this is specific to you family caregivers. I think it's so important to look at, what part of the pie is going well for you. Maybe you're retired and work and volunteer isn't really as important, or maybe you're not really a spiritual person, that you're going to slip that part of the pie out. That doesn't matter. But if you're only focused on physical health and financial wellness, really give it some thought as to how you can boost your psychological health, your social life, your spiritual, your intimate, if that's important to you. Because again, we are more at risk for so many health and mental health issues as we get older. We're all getting older too, in addition to our loved one. So just know that the more that you're getting engaged and you're having social contacts and reducing your loneliness, you're just gonna be set for a better aging process for yourself. So thank you all so much. If there's any last comments or questions, I'm really happy to answer anything. Sorry about that. Put the slide up again.
Okay. Well, in our next webinar is going to be on April 9th. The topic's going to be the power of purpose, helping individuals with dementia continue to experience meaning and joy with Dr. Tam Cummings. So that'll be at 6 p.m. Central Time on April 9th. But those flyers and invitations will be coming out shortly.
It looks like we did have somebody raise their hand.
Yeah, let me see here. Okay, give me 1 second here. Okay. Oh, wait, hold on. Sorry, Terry. I'm getting there. Okay, Terry, you should be good.
Hi, thank you so much. I didn't know if you had, because I got on a few minutes later and had some technical difficulties, but was there like a slide on the scoring chart for, I guess? Yeah, go
So,
ahead.
yeah, sure. So what we talked about was just like on a scale of 0 to 100, where do
Oh,
you feel like
okay.
your quality of life is today? And again, we know it's a snapshot, and that we were just using that in our mind's eye because obviously at the end of this, if you have a low score, lower than 65 especially, we want to say what are we going to do differently? And then we ask the same question is for your loved one, and obviously quality of life, loneliness, social contacts. If your loved one really can't have that conversation or isn't verbal, we would just ask for you to consider where you think they are on a scale of 0 to 100.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the information, especially. So my situation is my mom, 88, lives with my sister, and my sister is actually getting older herself. And so, I pretty much was helping out on the weekends because I was working full time. But I guess my question is, what's the best way to share with my sister some of this information? Because I really think she believes that, basic physical care and giving meds and feeding is enough. And I've tried to share with her that whole thing about, marathon TV watching is just not good. And I'm trying to share without offending her. And so I was just trying to think, do you think I should just let her watch this presentation since it's recorded?
Well, Terry, it's a really good question, and I want to say thank you for being on here because a lot of people like yourself, you're a secondary caregiver, don't take the time to join something like this. So thanks for joining us. Yeah, I would say, hey, like, why don't you watch this? I liked this. I found some interesting points, and then see if she
Hmm.
wants to talk to you about it. I would
Okay.
also suggest because she is taking care of your mom full time, you know, she doesn't have to watch it. Like she can just put her headphones on and listen to it while she's doing
Right.
chores or something like that. Um, because I think really like you have to, and I have a whole lot in cruising through caregiving about people like you, secondary caregivers, because you mean well and you are seeing things from your bird's eye view that your sister's not seeing.
Hmm.
However, like you said, like, how do I say it without offending her? Because I bet even though she's not doing everything the way you would do, her nerves are fried.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you just want to be really, really careful. Like I think one of the things that would most of the time is more is like a little bit less talk and more action. For example, like offering to do more, like go a little bit more, take a day and say, oh, I tried this with mom.
Right.
I took her for a walk, or I played a game with her, or we watched an old movie, and kind of share like what you
Yeah.
found to be the feedback because so often, and I'm wondering if anybody here who is a primary caregiver has any feedback for Terry. I'd love to get that conversation going, because I think so many times the primary caregiver is just waiting for someone to criticize them and say, you're not doing it right.
I know, because I just the other day, I said to her, I can take mom if you want now. Oh, and she even got offended when I said that. She's like, why? You don't think I'm doing a good enough job, or why? So my sister's very sensitive, but yeah, I have done some things like when I do have her, I've done a lot of things you've already mentioned, and I'll take videos and pictures and send them to my sister. But I think I'm gonna just have to be a little bit more direct, but in a way that's not offensive, and I haven't figured that
Yeah.
out.
And the other thing that can sometimes help, I think, is when somebody that's not you says it, that's not another daughter, like,
Right.
is there a mutual friend? Is there, somebody that's observing and says to your sister, listen, you seem so stressed. You're doing a great job, but, maybe we should get a little bit more help, or, uh, I don't want you to, I just don't want you to damage the relationship. I want you to just tread carefully.
Right. No, I agree. Yeah. She's always been a great big sister, so I don't want to do that.
But your concerns are really valid. Your concerns are definitely really valid because your mom could benefit from more engagement.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely,
but
absolutely.
great
Because what
question.
happens is I see the her declining because of it.
Yeah.
She's and of course it's unfortunately, like you mentioned, COVID just set everything back because for whatever reason, even when she was going to like a senior center before,
Mhm.
and my sister got really fearful of taking her up there. But when she was going, she could go by herself. I don't think she could go by herself anymore. So
Yeah.
I'm just gonna start taking her myself now. I just retired, so I'm gonna do it. But my sister didn't want to. So, and I think, like
Yeah,
you said,
that might be a
she's so
really great
tight.
way. That might be a great way for you to contribute. And you have this opportunity. You just retired. Hey, I'm retired. I want to help. I want to give you breaks. Position it as a break.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really
Yeah, of
appreciate it.
course.
Okay. I think that will wrap it up for tonight, Jen.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of the week. And thanks so much for joining us. Check Anthem out if you haven't already taken a tour.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Jennifer. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.